Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of On Queer Street, the nation's best-loved boxing podcast. I'm joined this evening by Mr. Boxbet himself, Tom Craze. Tom, first of all, thank you for hopping on and joining us. But secondly, I just wanted to check about your surname. I'm aware of how to pronounce it. I thought of a couple of jokes about the Craze, Ronnie and Reggie, but I won't, go down that route yet. I was wondering if it's an anglicisation, your surname, of a foreign name, just because obviously it's quite unusual, or is it a writer's name? That was my other theory. Oh, I've offended Tom, I think, so much. He's had to drop off the call already. No.
I was.
Oh, you're there. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
I was giving you the silent treatment there. Thanks for having me on, Sam. I'm frankly, I'm flattered that you've.
Oh, you there, mate? Sorry, you dropped off.
Hello.
Yes, you can hear you again. Yeah.
Right,
sorry, go on.
Slightly shaky start. I mean, I'm flattered that you've been kind of theorising about my surname in the way that you have. It's actually it's not a pen name. It is actually my real name for kind of better or for worse. And it's a Cornish name actually, so it's not an anglicisation. It's going to be Celtic, and I've never really kind of looked into what it meant, but it's very much my real name.
Fascinating. Thank you for sorry if I'm making you share personal information, but
no,
I thought I'd never heard a name anywhere like that wasn't a sort of an Eastern European anglicisation or something similar. But
believe me, I've heard all of the kind of craze,
yeah,
jokes you could possibly imagine. So you call me whatever you want.
Yeah, I thought of a few of them, and then I thought I bet he heard all of them by about the age of 10, and probably won't find it funny. But yeah, no, thank you for joining us, and yeah, good to have another proud Southwest. With a Cornish name, I'm going to claim you as Southwestern. It's nice to have a podcast about boxing where we don't have disgusting provincial accents everywhere. I'm sure you'll agree. Two very well-spoken, nice young men talking about people punching each other in the face. Tom, before we kick off, I know that you've got a white-collar sort of boxing thing coming up, and I didn't know if you wanted to sort of share any details about it or sort of tell people who are listening. And B, also, I was just wondering about how the training is going and all the rest of it. And I'm assuming it's four rounds, but yeah, speak on that if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So kind of shameless plug. I will be fighting on the April 7th show at the Troxy in the wonderful Limehouse, East London. It's a fantastic venue as part of the Bad Boy promotion show. As you say, it's my white collar debut, a kind of long in coming, really. Probably well overdue, given my age. It's kind of early days. Obviously, camp has just started. I don't know who I'm going to be matched with yet. Training is going well. I need to kind of get up to speed and kind of shake off some rust. It's been probably 10, 15 years since I was in a boxing gym proper. So it's kind of getting the fundamentals back in there. Yeah, getting the basics kind of ironed out, really. But it's going to be a good challenge. I'm very much looking forward to it. And it would be great to see as many people there as possible. Whether you kind of hate what I do on Twitter or love it, if you want to see me get punched in the face, this is your opportunity. Tickets are £30, £35 VIP, and can be bought from me direct. So do let me know if anyone wants to attend. It's 3 rounds. Probably welterweight, possibly light welter, depending how I do with the with kind of shaking the weight off. But yeah, that's the kind of extent of it at the moment.
Light welter, wow. Obviously, I'm going based on a profile picture where you're sitting down, but I had you down as middleweight plus. But obviously, I've got no idea how tall you are, so that's
no, absolutely not. So 5'9". I'm actually training with Darren Hamilton, ex-British light welter champion. So there's some good sort of parallels there in terms of sparring, and Wendy Camacho is kind of helping out as well. So it's a good setup, and I think kind of given 6 weeks, I'll be feeling fairly confident going in.
Camacho's massive, isn't he? Isn't he like a light heavyweight?
Cruiser. Yeah.
I hope he's being nice to you.
He's well, thankfully I'm not going to be sparring with him. but yeah, he's a good man.
Well, yeah, look forward to it, and yeah, like we say, get at Tom on Twitter directly if you want to get tickets or whatever, because it's good to support these things, especially when none of us can get tickets for love nor money to the actual sort of professional fights because they're all on fucking StubHub. But that's another debate for another day.
Well, as we all know, if you haven't boxed, you can't have an opinion. So I'm that one.
You'll finally be allowed to have an opinion about the performances of professional fighters. It's great.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, yeah, looking forward to hearing how it goes. And just before we kick off, because we haven't done a show for a couple of weeks, so we're going to be sort of skipping over quite a lot of stuff that's happened. It's been a very busy start to the year. But I just thought I'd get the Tony Dodson question out there to start with. 6 Degrees of Tony Dodson. I think the last one, I can't remember the last one we did, but I think it involved Junior Witter. For some reason, I've become a bit obsessed with Junior Witter since, and I've thought of loads of different ones involving him. But I'm not going to give you one of them yet. I'm going to pace them out over the next few shows. But tonight's 6 Degrees of Tony Dodson, remember, you have to connect the two fighters up in as few stages as possible based on common opponents. It's the lightning rod, Mr. Rod Salker, to Jeff Fenech, a.k.a. arguably the greatest Australian boxer of all time, if you don't count Kostya, which is, tomato, isn't it? But he's one of the top two from Australia. And I was inspired by The Asylum on Sunday night, who were talking about the best inside fighters of the last 30 years. Fenech is right up there. Phenomenal inside fighter if you haven't watched him. And obviously, we're being a bit ridiculous, and we're going to pair him with Rod Salker, the comedy non-opponent. No offense if Mr. Salker is listening, but yeah, Salker to Fenech, send your answers in and we'll do, I'll give you my path at the end of the show. Right, now, Tom, I don't know where you want to start. It's really sort of up to you. I know I sent you that big, long list of basically everything that's happened for the last fortnight, but I thought we could start with, rather than just recapping, we could sort of do our own twist on the fights from the last couple of weeks. Now, first of all, sure. Did you watch the card from Ohio on PBC last weekend? That was Robert Easter and Raushi Warren and all the rest of it. Have you seen those fights? Yeah,
I have. I didn't watch it live, but I caught up on Saturday. So yeah,
casual. We didn't stay up until 3 a.m. on a Friday night to watch Ricky Hatton. First of all, were you impressed with anyone particularly? What did you think of Robert Easter? If we start off with the main event.
Now, normally I'm a huge, I say huge, a kind of certainly pro Robert Easter. I think he's one of the best in his division up until Friday night, when I think it's certainly the worst I've seen him, at least kind of over the past few. Certainly wasn't impressed by him. Obviously, he kind of dropped Cruz repeatedly, had his own way for pretty much every second of the fight. But he didn't impress me. This was a guy he was clearly meant to blow out. It was a tune-up. It was a stay busy until he does who knows what, really. But he certainly didn't impress me. And Cruz really had, he had no right in being even in there with Easter at this stage of his career. So it was underwhelming. And frankly, it's the first time that I have been underwhelmed by Easter, because previously he's been, I think, getting better and better, and I don't think.
Yeah, he seemed to lose a bit of momentum. I know what you mean. I actually stupidly had put. I woke up for the Easter fight. I didn't watch Warren live because I had money on what I thought was a complete banker, which was Easter in under 6 rounds, and then Warren decision. And obviously, I woke up and saw that Warren had fucked the bet up immediately, and so thought, right, I need to try and bail myself out. So I put money on Cruz to go 12. Just a complete shot in the dark, and was absolutely astonished when watching the fight unfold and seeing the odds get narrower and narrower. I think I got 5 to 1 on it or something like that on the fight to go 12 rounds, and this was after 2 or 3 rounds. Yeah, I wasn't that impressed with Easter. I thought he was. He seemed to admire his work a lot. Like he'd land a big punch and then sort of step back, and I think maybe the crowd. Do you think maybe the crowd got to him a little bit in terms of sort of? They were cheering every punch. Do you think he was sort of playing to the crowd, maybe rather than focusing on the finish?
I think it was one of those things where it's kind of complacent, isn't it? And I think hometown fighter. You're right. Do they milk it? Do they kind of soak up the adulation and kind of, you know, take it easy, or do they just blow them out and do what they really should be doing? Clearly, Cruz is not a guy that he was dwelling on for too long going into the fight. I think that's probably fair to say. Yeah, it's one of those that I think he'll be keen to forget quite quickly, and frankly, so should we.
I think maybe he was a bit sort of treating it with a bit of contempt, I suppose, as we all were, because obviously I think Cruz had won one of his last four, including getting beaten by, not just beaten by a sort of poor opponent. Actually, he got knocked out by Edna Cherry. You know, Cherry's not amazing, but he's not terrible. So no shame in that. But he genuinely lost to a journeyman with a losing record about a year ago, 15 months ago. So, right. You know, Easter had absolutely no business going the distance with him. And yeah, a bit disappointing. He is talking about unifications repeatedly, Easter. Who would you like to see him in next, you know, in an ideal world?
To be honest, I still think he's got the match of most at lightweight. I think certainly the likes of Flanagan. I don't think that's a difficult fight for Easter at all. I know, actually, I think I saw a tweet from yourself earlier in the week that said that's a 50-50 fight, and I'm inclined to disagree. I think that's an Easter on his game. I think that makes that his fight quite handily.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit out on a limb there. I mean, I was sort of basing it on, I suppose it really depends where. I'd give Flanagan a 50-50 if the fight took place in the UK, just because I think Flanagan's slightly better than people are currently rating him. And I also think Easter is slightly worse. So maybe I'm being a bit sort of over dramatic in my mind. I know what you mean. I'd expect Easter to be the favourite, but I don't think it's a complete sort of blowout win. Would you give him a chance against, I'm trying to think, someone like Garcia or Linares, assuming he wins next time?
I think I'm safely assuming that Linares will win that fight against Crolla. I don't see much of an argument for Crolla kind of reversing the outcome of that, barring something kind of shady on the cards. I give Easter a chance against all of them. Garcia, I think, is the trickiest fight there for anyone, frankly. Linares, I think Easter actually could cause difficulties. I think Easter is the sort of puncher, and I think he's got the sort of strength that Linares could potentially wilt to. I think that's a good fight. Garcia Easter is, you know, probably the fight to make it lightweight. How realistic that will be, we'll see.
I think there's kind of a sort of tier between the four champions at the moment. And again, this is me being a bit biased because I'm a massive Garcia fan, but I think Garcia and Linares are the top two in terms of pedigree and achievements, obviously. And then you've got Easter and Flanagan below them. If you had to rank them in order, obviously Flanagan would be fourth. I'd say Linares would have to be first at the moment. But I think there's a tier system, and I'd quite like to see Flanagan Easter and then Garcia Linares, and then the winner sort of square off in a proper unification. I think that would be, you know, again, ideal world. It probably won't happen, but if they could do that over the next year, 18 months, I'd be a very happy man. There's quite a lot of interesting fights out there, and it would be great to have a unified champion because, in theory, you know, you don't have a superstar like a Canelo who's just going to sort of sell out arenas fighting anyone. So you'd think that the guys would know that unifications would bring the money in, and Easter clearly wants big fights. He seemed quite sort of agitated before the Cruz fight, and obviously felt that it was an opponent, you know, rightly an opponent below his level. But if we thought Easter was a bit sort of underwhelming, I hate to think what you think about Warren, because obviously he lost his WBA belt, I think that's right, to the Z-Man. Double Z, Zakianov. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Nice to see Ricky Hatton win a world title as a trainer for the first time. But I mean, Warren, you know, dropped the guy twice in the first round and then proceeded to lose, I would say, 9 of the next 11 rounds quite clearly. I didn't think it was that hard to score when I watched it the next day. I thought Zakianov clearly won by 3 or 4 points. Did you see it? And, you know, what were your thoughts on Warren? Do you think he sort of fell apart mentally? It was a very strange performance.
I did see it. I think it's frankly where Warren should kind of be. I think he's a guy who's probably overachieved, frankly, on on what we saw, obviously, kind of at the Olympics and against kind of Payano. He's a solid fighter. He's he's a WBA titleist, basically. I don't think he's anything beyond that. I don't think ZZ or kind of ZZ. Clearly, this guy is nothing special either. But I think Warren is painfully limited. He's okay. I think that, they were talking about the McDonald fight for a long time. I think that's a fight McDonald would have looked very good in, frankly.
Yeah, it's a shame that probably won't happen now, isn't it? Because that seemed to be the logical next step. And I remember Dave Caldwell saying before the Solis fight, they'd been waiting on Warren's camp for months and months, and they were just, everyone was kind of sitting around thinking, why isn't the fight happening? Like this, surely this makes sense as a unification, and it probably won't now because McDonald's got his rematch, hasn't he, with Solis, and then Warren's lost his belt. I don't know if he'll try and get a rematch with Zakyanov. That would make sense as well. But yeah, I know what you mean, and I felt like it was one of those funny, quite rare situations in boxing where a guy, I've seen it with Paulie a couple of times, when a guy who's not a puncher at all hurts his opponent and genuinely doesn't know what to do because it's so rare that he actually hurts someone. Right. And I remember Paulie wobbling Senchenko quite early on and just not having a clue what to do with it because he just hadn't wobbled anyone for about 10 years. And I felt, Warren was the same. He obviously dropped Zakyanov twice and then he kind of didn't show the killer instinct when the guy was clearly hurt. And then he allowed him back into the fight. And you just think, a guy who's used to getting knockouts would never have done that. It was a strange one. I
think you're right. I think it almost took Warren by surprise. It felt, and the difference there being with the comparison you drew with obviously Paulie Senchenko is that Paulie technically was levels above Senchenko, and he ripped into shreds for the kind of duration. Warren isn't a level certainly above kind of Zakyanov or many, I think, in the top 10 at bantam. I think he did what he could. He clearly didn't have the killer instinct, and with the number of knockouts he has, he's probably never going to get that killer instinct. Where he goes next, I'm not quite sure.
He's not that young, is he? Yeah.
He's not that young. He does have some name value, of course. But if you look around at the division, there's not a huge amount of US interest there for starters. Would he? I can't imagine him having great success moving up with the power that he's got. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but he has name value. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in a kind of McDonald fight because he's an American name. He's not going to sell, but he's going to be an easier sell than another kind of a Solis type. Exactly. Yeah.
I actually think obviously Solis is mandated, and I think it's completely justified that he gets the rematch. But I wouldn't mind Warren even coming off a loss against McDonald. I think that would be okay as a sort of maybe a chief support or something on a Sky card. But equally, the one I'd quite like is McDonald against Payano, just because I think that would actually be a bit of an action fight. They both throw a million punches. I actually think that would be quite fun, as far as McDonald fights can be fun. But of course, he's ultimately looking to move up, isn't he? A bit like Easter would, to be honest. Just going back for a second, I can see Easter. If you look at his frame, I could see Easter up at welterweight in the future quite easily. So we'll see. We'll see where he goes in a year's time if he can't get the big fights. So that was that card, which I thought was reasonably fun for a sort of an Adrien Broner promotion, which is they always seem to get a good crowd and lots of noise from the supporters, which is makes a good atmosphere. The next one, and I suppose, like I said, we'll go back through the last couple of weeks, but with a bit of a twist rather than just recapping. So I'm going to throw some questions at you related to the fights that have gone on. So the first one is obviously the big fight from the last month was Frampton Santa Cruz rematch. Now, forget the second fight. Do you want to see a third fight next? And if not, why not?
I think the key word there is next. Do I want to see a rematch or the rubber match? I do at some point. I'm not in any great need to see it right now. The first fight was great. The second fight, well, I say great. It was very good. Second fight was good.
It wasn't that good though, was it? You know
it was it was watchable, but it was it was what it was. And I think a third fight would look much the same, which it explains really why I'm not in any kind of urgent need to see it next, because I think I can see how that's going to turn out. I think there are better fights and fights which we don't know how they're going to look to be made right now for both, really. I think both have more to prove. That fight's always going to be there.
I'd quite like to see Frampton Mares. I know that's been mentioned. Again, just purely because I think that would be quite good action in terms of the exchanges in the middle of the ring. I don't know who I'd like to see Santa Cruz in with next. I mean, I suppose Selby's there. He's kind of desperate for a world title fight. Frampton Selby would be fun. I'd watch it. I don't think it would be a sort of a great fight of the year contender by any means. Would you want something? I don't know. Maybe Quigg Santa Cruz. That could potentially be fun. Not that Quigg has earned it at all, but could be a fun fight.
Well, I think that's a fight that. Yeah, I think it's a good star match for sure. I think that they're very similar. It does seem that the four kind of dancing around each other at featherweight are Santa Cruz, Selby, Frampton, and Mares. You've got others kind of looking in, Quigg obviously being one of them, Russell, Valdez obviously. But I know that Mares has been calling out Selby, Santa Cruz, Mares. Obviously that rematch is there. Frampton Selby, I think, is the one that I would like to see most out of those. I think that's the picture of. There are a few others kind of jostling for position there, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a sort of a final four type arrangement.
I'd like to see Russell get involved again, because I actually think I'm one who, even though I know he got dominated by Lomachenko and all the rest of it, I think Russell's really good, and I actually think he'd beat every single other guy that you just mentioned. All things being equal, obviously we can never say for sure, but I would pick Russell to quite handily beat Mares and Quigg, for example. I would beat him to beat. I think I'd pick him to probably knock out Selby. I think Russell he's got the fastest hands of all of them, which gives him a huge kind of intangible advantage, I suppose. And I'd like to see him get back involved. Valdez is great, but I do think Valdez is. I think I'm right in saying he's the youngest of all the ones we've mentioned by quite a long way. I mean, I think he's 20. He's 22 or something. And I know Frampton and Quigg are they're 27, 28. I think in their prime. I think Valdez has got a bit of learning to do. Interestingly, Quigg has called Mares out and asked that he come to the UK for some reason, as if Quigg has the leverage to demand that a champion in a new weight class comes to fight him in his hometown.
Well, I mean, it's not so much about leverage, is it? That's a decent money fight for Mares. I think Mares is in a position where he knows potentially he needs to travel, and from what he's been tweeting, he's up for that.
Oh, really? I haven't seen his tweets. Has he responded to it? Oh.
His tweet was actually calling out Selby, I believe. But I for sure I could see him fighting Quigg. I don't think that's a fight that Quigg will be put in against anytime soon. I think Mares is a very kind of stiff test for him.
It'd be his best win by a mile, wouldn't it? I think. What about Quigg and Cuellar, someone like that? I'm thinking of another guy who's kind of on the fringes. I think that's a winnable fight for Quigg and could actually be a sort of decent test in the division.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, Cuellar's a good fighter. Where Quigg is going to fit into the kind of top 10, 15, I'm not quite sure. Quigg against someone like Valdez, that's a great fight. I don't think we're going to see that. I think Quigg is going to be bedded in to 126 pretty pedestrianly, let's say. Yeah, I think we're going to be waiting a while to see Quigg in with a proper kind of champion, for want of a better word. Russell Jr. I think is going to be doing what Russell Jr. does for quite a while. Yeah,
I can see him just fighting once every 18 months or so, and it's a shame because I think if Russell holds to his word and retires in 3 years, I think he said he wants 5 more fights or something like that. If he has 5 more fights and retires, it will be wasted potential, and it's a shame because I know he stepped up to the top level once and got soundly beaten, but I think he's a very, very good fighter on his day, and it would be a shame not to see him in against sort of people on the same level as him. I mean, I wouldn't mind Mares against Russell next. I think that would make a fair bit of sense as well. I don't really want a Santa Cruz Mares rematch. I'm not that interested in it. I thought Santa Cruz won quite clearly the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, it's a case of what would happen differently if they fought again. I can't see much that would happen differently. And the same with Frampton, as you mentioned. the Frampton Santa Cruz fight is it's one of those irritating rematches where I've predicted the fights. I predicted each one wrong. So I thought Santa Cruz would win the first fight behind his jab, and then I thought Frampton would counterpunch and win the rematch. And obviously the opposite happened.
That's interesting. It was actually quite the opposite for me, and I'm whatever happens with the rubber match, I'm going to look back on both of those fights quite fondly. Did
you pick Frampton first time round?
I did. I picked Frampton not only from a betting point of view, it was obviously that I tend to kind of gravitate towards. I genuinely thought he would win the fight, and going into that fight, the odds kept drifting and drifting and drifting. By the opening bell, he was 3-1. That was my biggest win of last year, or certainly my favourite bet as well. The second fight, I figured it would be much closer. I thought Santa Cruz would make the adjustments, and again, I sort of I backed him to do so. I think it was always going to be closer, and I think it was one of those fights where saying, okay, yeah, look, Frampton won the first fight. He's going to do the same a little bit clearer last time or next time. It never really struck me as that sort of fight. The third fight is it's easy to say again that Santa Cruz would be the guy who makes those adjustments. Obviously, he's come out and said, look, he's not going to go to Belfast, or rather, his kind of dad has come out and said, look, you're not going to go to Belfast. We'll see.
Where would you like to see a third fight? Assuming, let's say, Belfast and LA are off the table, as I think they should be. I don't think either guy should have to go to the other guy's actual hometown. I'm fine. I think Santa Cruz should come to the UK, but I don't think he should go to Belfast. And I actually sort of got into a bit of a row earlier this week because apparently he said he would, and then he went back on it. And people kept saying, oh, Frampton went to his hometown twice. And you always have to say, look, that's like saying Kell Brook went to Sean Porter's hometown. He went to his country, but he didn't go to his hometown at all. It's completely different, especially New York, which is about the same distance from LA as it is from Belfast. Ridiculous.
Right.
But would you like to see it in London or Manchester or somewhere in the UK?
I think the thing is, if you look at it and whether Santa Cruz would kind of factor this in, Frampton Quigg was a Frampton arena that night at the Manchester Arena. I was there for that. And even though that was essentially in Quigg's hometown, that was all Frampton. That would be as very much Santa Cruz would be the away fighter there. That would be noisy. I suspect it would be the same at the O2 or anywhere in the UK. And I think, to be honest, I think Frampton would have the same sort of advantage potentially on the in terms of swaying the judges. I think Vegas is the fair option for the third fight, but whether we'll see it there or not, I'm not sure. New York,
because New York was arguably a home fight for Frampton, wasn't it? I mean, if you looked at the crowd and the noise,
and that's going to be the case, pretty much wherever Frampton goes, unless it's LA or Mexico. He's always going to have more of the travelling support, so that's just something Santa Cruz is going to have to deal with, which obviously he did to his credit last time out.
Well, speaking of fights that demand a rematch, or speaking of fights that absolutely do not demand a rematch, I should say, Garcia against Latikanen, very, very briefly, obviously. I think we both actually spoke about this privately on Twitter and said that we were both sort of heavily backing the Garcia KO. Garcia looked great. There's not much you can really do to analyse the fight. I might actually watch it back again later because it was one of those fights where I haven't had this since, I'm trying to think of the last fight. I think Golovkin-Lemieux was the last time where within 30 seconds, you knew that one of the guys had absolutely no chance to win. I don't know if you remember the first round of Golovkin-Lemieux, when he just put that jab out and Lemieux just had there was just no way he could come back from it. And you just immediately knew, okay, Golovkin is 100% winning this fight, bar, his shoulder falling out or something. And Garcia-Latikanen was exactly the same. If we forget the fight for a moment, where would you like to see Garcia go next? I mean, we mentioned Linares. Would you like to see Linares unification next, or do you think the Easter fight might be better, as a spectacle?
Well, I think Garcia Linares is one of the best fights in all of boxing at the moment. I think whereas we sort of disagreed on Easter earlier, I think we certainly agree on Garcia. I think he's potentially top kind of 6-7 pound for pound. Certainly easily top 10.
Well, I had him top 10 before he took his break from the sport, and I remember arguing. Do you remember that year, 2013? It was a fantastic year for fights generally, but there were about 6 or 7 really strong candidates for Fighter of the Year. I mean, you had Danny Garcia with beating Matisse, unifying the division, all the rest of it. You had Mikey Garcia moving up a weight class, knocking out like 3 top 10 guys or whatever it was. And then you had Floyd obviously beating Canelo. You had, I think there was a British fighter in there as well, who had, I forget now anyway, but there were about 5 or 6 really strong candidates. Crawford as well. I think Crawford had gone to Scotland and beat Burns, and then he'd knocked someone else out on HBO, I forget, but he was right up there.
Froch as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Froch as well, obviously winning sort of the rubber match with Groves and all the rest of it, and cementing his place as
Kessler as well. Yeah.
Yes, Kessler. Yeah, exactly. Very strong sort of showing from a number of fighters, and I remember arguing that Garcia was a top 5 pound for pound at the time, and then being very annoyed when he disappeared, and I was never given we were never given a chance to see whether it was true or not. I agree with you. I think if he's active, he's at least top 6, top 7, arguably top 5.
Absolutely.
Would you like to see? Well, okay. Here's a question: would you like Linares next, or would you like Crawford next?
For Garcia?
Yeah.
I'm going to say Lomachenko.
Oh, okay.
If I may. I think Linares is the more logical fight to make, just because it tidies up that picture there at lightweight. I think then that's a fantastic fight. I expect Linares to win pretty handily against Crawler, and then they both have an open slate, and that it's just a fantastic fight. I think Garcia does win that fight, and I think he potentially wins it by stoppage. I like Linares an awful lot, but I think he's vulnerable, and I think Garcia just has that precision that, as we saw against Sladicin, and it's that's kind of hard to argue with.
I mean, Garcia in the form he's appeared to be in since he came back. I mean, I'd pick him to knock out just about anyone in the division. I'd certainly pick him to stop guys like Crawler and the guy, fighters I consider to be sort of B+ rather than A fighters. And yeah, so I agree with you completely. Actually, I'm not sure the Lomachenko fight ever happens, just because of the top rank animosity, which is another reason. Of course. Another reason why I think Linares makes perfect sense, because obviously he's golden boy, and I don't think Garcia has any issue of what's the word, sort of legal issues or any lawsuits going back and forth with De La Hoya. So hopefully that could be made.
The only thing there is obviously I believe Garcia is kind of not necessarily signed to, but he's kind of moving around in Heyman circles there. So we'd have to see. But he is a free agent, I believe.
Well, the one issue was that he is a free agent. I think that's right, and he's sort of got a rolling agreement with Showtime. But Schaefer has been sniffing around, and obviously Schaefer and De La Hoya are unlikely to work together anytime soon. Right. So that could be one potential spanner in the works. I mean, as long as Garcia's in a unification next, I'll be happy. I mean, he spent about 18 months calling out Flanagan. I don't think Warren would put Flanagan in with him for any amount of money on earth, pretty much. No. But we'll see. I've got hope for Mikey, and he can always go up to 140. He's easily got the frame for it.
I think based on that, Flanagan is that's a fight that clearly I don't think we're likely to ever see. But I think Flanagan is probably one of the few guys there at lightweight that Garcia doesn't stop. I think Flanagan is probably just tough enough to kind of stick it out. I think it would be hugely one-sided.
And he'd actually have a similar reach to Garcia, wouldn't he? So he wouldn't be sort of out of range the entire time. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think, and Flanagan is a tough guy. Like the amount of headbutts I've seen him take in certain fights and keep going. But yeah, okay. So let's move on from that. We've got. I'll skip over. Actually, I'll tell you what. We'll do one more of my strange questions. So skipping over to the HBO card from that same night.
Yes,
I'll give you Takashi Miura, Miguel Roman, Francisco Vargas, and Miguel Burchelt. If you can make one fight involving any two of those, what would you make?
Miura Burchell.
Wouldn't be the Vargas rematch. Interesting. Okay.
No, I don't think so. Burchell and Vargas too?
Sorry, Miura and Vargas I was thinking of, because that's what, I mean, HBO have been sort of pushing for that for about 18 months, haven't they?
I don't think so. I think the way that night was set up was, again, it was a kind of semi-final type setup. And I think Miura has earned that. I think Vargas is, I think he could kind of do with a night off, really. And I think Miura is a very, very tough fight for him. Whether Vargas would get through that like he did the first time, I'm not sure. But no, I'm kind of all for meritocracy there. Let's put the winners in against each other and see how that gets on. It's fresh. And it's deserved.
Yeah, and it makes sense, like you say, both from a sort of rankings perspective and in terms of action, because obviously Miura and Burchell are both very aggressive fighters. For what it's worth, I think Burchell wins that very, very well. I think he might knock Miura out. And I think that will be a case of sort of hand speed and combination punching, because Miura, as we know, I love Miura. He's great to watch, but he's the guy who will load up and throw one huge punch at a time, pretty much.
Right. I think it's interesting because Burchell is still and remains a guy that we haven't seen very much of at all, and particularly at this kind of level. Title. It's not kind of elite, clearly. But before Vargas, we'd seen very little of Burchell at any kind of reasonable level. Vargas, I think, was late.
Yeah. Can I ask? Sorry to cut you off. Did you? Because again, this was another one we discussed,
Sure.
And I think we agreed that it was a sort of 50-50 going in. And I think I bet Vargas points because I kind of wanted to bet Burchell because I'd seen him a couple of times, but the odds just weren't that good. I was expecting Vargas to be quite a substantial favourite, and he really wasn't at all. So obviously there were a fair bit of money had been put on Burchell as well. I didn't really see any value in it. But again, you've got to do your due diligence with these things, because if I'd seen that I would have put the house on Burchell. HBO, I don't know if you've seen the HBO broadcast, but after a round, they did a close-up of Vargas's eye before the fight, during the fighter meetings. And obviously that's footage you don't see until the fight starts. But his eye looked like someone had poured sort of candle wax on it. Do you know what I mean? It was just like, it was horrible, absolutely horrible. And you just think, he's clearly not had any proper plastic surgery done on it. And to no one's surprise, within about 2 rounds, it was, it looked like a sort of steak was sat on his eyelid. It was absolutely horrible. But
I think if you look at again, kind of going back to the odds, the movement, there was a huge movement on Burchell from how that fight opened to how it closed. And as you say, by the time that fight started, or just prior to, I looked at the Burchell price. I think he ended up maybe 5-4, and I thought that's a little bit short for my liking. But
yeah.
Again, in hindsight, certain people would have seen that they would have clearly been in the know about the state of Vargas, and perhaps that's a reason why there was a bit of a steam in on Burchell. But clearly, hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good fight. Vargas tried hard. I'd like to see both him and Roman get another HBO date. I think they've both earned it. Especially Roman, who was much tougher than I expected him to be. I'd seen him a couple of times before, and I thought he was quite slow. And I thought Miura, speed is what kills Miura. And I thought really Roman wouldn't be fast enough, but he hurt Miura a couple of times. And I thought his sort of grinding style, Miura had to dig very, very deep to win that fight. And again, if anyone hasn't seen it, very, very good fight. One of the best body shots I've ever seen in, I think it was the 9th round, that put Roman down for the first time.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I think they called it a home run. It really was a home run. It was the same motion as when you swing a baseball bat. A bit, not much technique, but it doesn't really matter when you can hit that hard.
Well, no, he loaded up on it. He really, the kind of movement to the torque he got on that. It's just a fantastic shot.
He loaded up on it for about 3 seconds before he threw it. It was, and you sort of got the impression it was a bit like on a video game where you're trying to sort of get a quick move in while the other guy's powering up or something, and you fuck up the timing and you get hit. But it was a strange one, and obviously that was the beginning of the end for Roman. But a really gutsy performance by both guys, and you'd like to see them both get another chance on the big stage. I'm sure we will get Burchell Miura in the summer. I see no reason why that can't be made fairly quickly, especially as Burchell he hardly looked like he had a mark on him after the fight, which was, you don't expect to fight Vargas and come away with, you know, a completely sort of clean face, but Bachelt barely touched.
That got very easy for him towards the end, though. It was, you know, he couldn't miss. But you're right. He made it look very easy. Whether that says a lot about him or more about Vargas, we're not quite sure.
I think
we'll have to see.
I think Bachelt is a guy who's improving. Has a very good jab, and is a great combination puncher. So he's a guy who could potentially go quite a long way, I think, especially in that division where there's a lot of good fighters, but I wouldn't say there was necessarily one sort of. And sorry, I'm going to sound very stupid here. I can't remember if Lomachenko's 135 or 130 at the moment. He's 135, isn't he?
No, he's super feather 130.
Okay, sorry. So in that case, forget what I just said. There is one truly elite guy, but then there's a bunch of others below him who are sort of a B+ level who can have some really good fights together. And in a way, you kind of don't really want to put any of them in with Lomachenko because it's a foregone conclusion. And you know, a guy like Bachelt, I think, deserves a chance to build up some momentum before he gets put in. You know, put into a unification, basically.
Well, and I mean, obviously, Lomachenko has he has a very good fight lined up. He's at least a level above, you know, the rest of the top 10, certainly above the likes of Sosa. If it wasn't Lomachenko, Sosa is a good match for kind of anyone in that division at the moment. But yeah, clearly Lomachenko is going to be too good there.
Yeah, it's one of those fights where I'd be sort of strangely surprised if Lomachenko stopped Sosa, just because I think Sosa's very tough. But equally, I would also be quite surprised if Sosa won a single round. So it's a bit of a weird.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's.
I'd quite like to put a bet on that to see if Sosa wins a single round on the cards, because I think it could look like the Walters fight where, obviously the cards were dodgy that night, but Sosa genuinely lost every single round, and we've seen the difference between Walters and Lomachenko. So. You know, credit to him for taking it. It's all you can really ask, I suppose. But I think he would be as surprised as the rest of us if he actually won that fight. Right, now, just skipping over a couple more before we get onto the fun stuff of Eubank Jr. and David Price, who I love talking about. Sammy Vasquez against Luis Collazo. I'm going to come back at you now because I had a little bet on Collazo that night just because he was almost 4-1, and I thought it's quite good value for a guy who's. You know, Vasquez hasn't really beaten anyone at the top level, and Collazo's pretty good. My question is, forget that fight. Collazo's performance inspired this line of questioning. Who would you say is the best gatekeeper in the sport at the moment? Because I would say Collazo's got a pretty good shout.
I think he's got a good shout. Gatekeeper. I think someone like Steve Cunningham is a good test for pretty much most heavyweights out there. Obviously, he looked a bit rough against or last time out.
Yeah, I'd agree.
You know, there's a few, isn't there? I think even someone like, and he's still kicking around. I think DeMarcus Cooley is still going and still winning. And every so often, I follow him on Twitter, and every so often he's kind of over in Russia or the Ukraine or somewhere, stopping some hype prospect in a few rounds, and he just packs his bags and gets on again. Clearly, he's seen better days, but he's still a guy who even in February 2017 is.
What about a guy like Gabe Rosado, who we may well be seeing in the UK soon?
I think the problem with Gabe Rosado is how do you define gatekeeper? He's a guy who just seems to keep losing.
But I think I would. Sorry, just to interrupt. No. I would define it for the purposes of this as someone that you need to get past if you want to reach the top level, basically. Because all the top 15 at his weight class have beaten him, haven't they? Pretty much.
Right. He's a guy who has a ceiling that's pretty well established. Most guys have beat him, and most guys have kind of walloped him in doing so. I think that's a decent shot. I think also someone like Rebrasse at super middle is one that's sort of been recycled, but he's always going to put up a decent test. I think he beat Rocky Fielding that night. I could see him getting wheeled out for a few more as well.
Yeah, he's the sort of guy where, when they mentioned Rosado sort of dropped a tweet suggesting that he'd be fighting in the UK soon. And I immediately thought, perfect fight for him would be someone like Marcus Morrison, you know, a guy who's had about 12 fights or whatever. Yeah. And it would be a bit like, I suppose, the Carson Jones-Ben Hall fight from last year, where no one is saying that Carson Jones and Rosado are like elite fighters, but it would be a significant step up from what the prospect had been facing up to that point. Sadly, I've since been informed by people who've been paying much closer attention that it looks like it might be Martin Murray against Rosado, which is just a completely pointless fight. I mean, what does that gain Martin Murray? Absolutely pointless. Morrison would actually gain something from beating Gabe Rosado.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but what does Murray get from it? And I mean, it would be a good win for Rosado, I suppose. But you know, stupid fight, bad matchmaking, in my opinion.
But you know, then again, you look at Murray's record, and that's probably his best win.
Oh yeah, probably.
That's still his best win. It's a fight he would win.
On the cards, I actually think Rosado might outwork him in some of the rounds. Just because Murray does tend to sort of, he's always in second gear, isn't he? Always. And Rosado's not a terrible fighter. He's just been matched very, very tough throughout. He's not good enough to have fought the opponents. He's sort of NABO level, I'd say. Do you know what I mean? But he's been matched consistently at world level, and obviously been put in with some huge punches. Yeah.
And we're assuming that fight would be at middleweight. I think I read Martin Murray is stepping down. Obviously, Rosado is kind of 154, 160.
Yeah,
isn't he?
He's a small middleweight, isn't he? And Murray's obviously not a super middleweight. I think he's accepted that now. Right. Okay. So that was that. So in terms of gatekeepers, we had my favourite was always Edison Miranda, who I thought was just the epitome of the tough gatekeeper. But and obviously Darnell Boone, everyone's favourite.
I think Carson Jones is a good shout, as you just said. I think that's he's still there. He's still still kicking away.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I suppose he is a gatekeeper, but I think he's a gatekeeper at a slightly lower level. Whereas you know, I remember David Lemieux when he fought Rosado a couple of years ago. That was the big test. They were saying, you know, if he beats Rosado, then he's ready to fight for titles. Whereas, you know, beating Carson Jones, I don't know how far it gets you, but yeah, I know what you mean. We're splitting hairs a little bit, but yeah. So sorry, and then to go on to my last weird question based on the last few weeks, we're gonna lump these two fights in together. If you want to recap either of them, Felix Verdejo or Chris Eubank Jr., who's more overrated?
Oh, it's a good question. I think Eubank Jr. is more overrated. I think Verdejo, the momentum is kind of slowed down. Maybe it's going to pick up again now he's back from his injury. But frankly, there's so much more hype around Eubank Jr. When you say overrating, who's rating him? It's certainly I guess more of a casual audience. I think anyone kind of informed watching that fight at the or rather the other week, and breaking it down, looking at what he was doing, technically was very flashy, but that's not going to stick against any kind of super middleweight worth their salt, and it's kind of any middleweight really. In terms of overrating, yeah.
I meant sort of in terms of unjustified hype, I suppose, because I agree with you. No one was saying, "Oh, Verdejo's the best fighter in the division" or anything, but there was a lot of media attention and hype around him when he was scraping decisions against guys who were getting sort of blasted out in a couple of rounds by in their next fight, sort of thing.
Well, I think there actually was a point, and I may have even been guilty of this at one point, to say that it was a couple of years ago, but remember it was Verdejo and it was Luke Campbell, and they were the bright young things in that division. That was a dream fight, wasn't it? How things change.
Well, I mean, it might make a weird kind of sense in a year or two's time, a sort of loser leaves town kind of a match, but it certainly won't be a unification, which maybe we all thought it was. And I was very. I can say I was never really on the Verdejo train, to my credit, but I was very much on the Luke Campbell train. So I'm just as bad, just with in a different way. But I remember for a while it was very funny watching a lot of the Americans on the East Coast sort of laughing at the Brits for rating Campbell, and then we would laugh back at them for rating Verdejo, and I think we were both sort of fooled in our own ways. But to be honest, if they said that fight was next, I actually think I'd watch it. I'd be quite interested in that fight. And it's not, it's not an elite level. It's not even really a world level fight. But yeah, I've got a bit fed up with Campbell, who I think has recovered quite well from his loss, but I'm sick of this nonsense with Scott Cardle about them not making that fight. It's just annoyed me, and he's treading water, and it's just a waste. The guy's almost 30 now.
The thing with Campbell, he looked very good last time. Obviously, it wasn't against any kind of world level opposition, but it was probably the best we've seen him against anyone worth their salt.
Was that against Matthews? Was that his last fight? Yeah. Because I was going to say the one against who's the guy Easter knocked out? Mendes, wasn't it? Mendes. Because against Mendes, he won clearly, but he did wobble a bit, and I thought, oh God, here we go again. He's found his level. But yeah, I agree with you. He was very good against Matthews. I had a bet on that to go the distance. I was pretty sure Derry could go 12, and obviously, I thought Campbell finished him very well. And I mean, would you like to see Campbell against someone like O'Hara Davis? I know. Again, I know Hearn would never make it in the near future, but that would be quite a good sort of prospect meets prospect, and only the winner can move forward type of a fight.
Well, I think that's obviously reliant on Campbell moving up further, and I'm not sure that's going to be a leap that he's likely to make. I think looking at Campbell, he's being kind of manoeuvred into position for he's going the WBC route by the looks of it. Whether he's going to fit in, obviously with Garcia around, I'm not quite sure. I think O'Hara Davis, that's a guy that in terms of a prospect, it's a Josh Taylor fight that for me needs to happen. I don't think we'll see Campbell Davis. No, absolutely.
Taylor's got another date, hasn't he? I saw a tweet today saying I don't think he's got an opponent, but he's back out in April or something like that. So it's very good to see him being moved quickly and sort of keeping busy and not having these. The Matthews Davis fight doesn't interest me at all. So I'd much rather watch a guy like Josh Taylor in learning fights than watch this sort of nonsense fake rivalry. And again, O'Hara Davis is a guy I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's a hype job, although he is arguably a little bit overhyped at this stage. But he's a good fighter. I just don't have any interest in Matthews now. And as soon as it became clear that Matthews was absolutely no threat anymore, Hearn has lined his guys up to go in with him. And it's just, you know what's going to happen. And it's a bit of a shame. I'd quite like to see, do you remember the guy who fought Matthews a couple of years ago, the Canadian, Tony, I forget his surname now. Tony, what was his name? Not Perez, something like that.
Tony Louise.
Tony Louise, that was it. Yeah, and I thought he beat Matthews that night. I thought it was a close fight, but I thought he deserved to win. I'd like to see someone like Campbell in with him. I'd like to see someone like O'Hara Davis maybe in with him. And I appreciate there's a £5 difference, but Louise is quite a big guy. He could move up. But it's a shame. I'm not interested in Derry, and I think he should retire. I think he's had like 60 fights now, hasn't he, or something ridiculous.
Well, I think the thing with Derry Matthews, and I don't mind watching him fight. He's normally in kind of entertaining contests. Really, he keeps getting beaten pretty soundly, as he did against Flanagan, as he did against Campbell, as I think he probably will against Davis. And I'm with you. I think Davis is talented. Davis is going to be hyped for the wrong reasons potentially, because he's going to be playing the heel. And it's certainly in this kind of regional London-Liverpool battle that he's kind of got going with Matthews. He's very much the villain, and people. I think it's probably a ploy. From everything I've heard, Davis is a genuinely kind of nice guy, but I think he's using that to his advantage, and I think he's marketable. I think getting through these kind of domestic level fights, if Matthews is there anymore, are a decent foundation for him, and I think fighting on a bill like Hay Bellew is a good is good exposure for him for sure.
For the fight I would have liked to see, and this is again ideal world, because I appreciate the promotional stuff would have made it tricky. I think Nurse would have been a good fight for Davis. Again, British level, but a good one. And then maybe a guy like Jack Catterall as well. Again, appreciate that the promotion makes it impossible, but
well, I think that's a huge leap for Davis. I think Catterall, Davis is a good fight, particularly the star-wise. That makes a lot of sense. But I can't imagine that. Obviously, again, promotional side, Davis is going to be in against Nurse anytime soon. I think that's a horrible fight for Davis
at the moment. Would you think Nurse has a shot in that one? Because I agree with you. I think Nurse is quite underrated. As a fighter.
I think he is, and I think Nurse is. Again, I'm not quite sure where he's going to go next, but yeah, I think Nurse is overrated. I'm not saying he would beat Davis. I think Davis does give him a good fight, but he's so awkward. And if Davis were to win that fight, I don't think he would look flashy doing so. I think that's the fight that he would really have to grind out one way or the other.
I've just seen, sorry, and apologies because you probably already know this, but I've just seen Tyrone Nurse is fighting Joe Hughes next in April, who's the guy who had a very close fight with Catterall about a year ago, I think. And I remember it because he's got that palsy thing when one of your arms is shorter than the other. And I don't mean it in a funny way. I just remember him talking about it in the pre-fight interview. That I think his right arm is a couple of inches longer than his left, which and Barry Jones was saying it on commentary, which kind of limits how he has to fight in a funny way. But
right, and I think that's a fight.
Yeah, good fight.
I think Nurse is above that. Whether Nurse is good enough to kind of move onto world level at 140, I don't know. But I think that's a fight he's going to win. I think he'll win that well. But it's whether Warren can kind of move him up to anything more substantial.
Well, you'd like to see him at least sort of test himself at Euro level, wouldn't you? Really.
I think he's at least that. I think he'd do well there. Yeah.
I agree. I think he's in the same boat as, and I've been saying this for a while, and it could completely blow up in my face in the next couple of years. But I've always said that I think Skeet is massively underrated as well, and should be fighting at a much higher level than he is. And again, these are guys who seem to have been sort of endlessly recycling British level opponents when really they should be on at least Euro level. And I know Skeet's ranked in the WBC, and I remember looking at their rankings last year. And Skeet was like number 14 or 13 or whatever. And obviously Garcia was the champion, and you had Amir Khan in there and all the rest of it. And I thought, looked at the top 15, I thought Skeet could probably beat 10 of these guys. And I'm not saying he could beat Garcia or he could beat Khan or anything else, but he's easily good enough to be sort of around the top 10 in that division. And it's a shame that he's never had the chance.
He is. And I think going back to kind of Nurse, if you're talking British names around that level, you know, you've got someone like Ricky Burns, who I know is one of your favourites. But you know, Burns against Nurse, I think that's a fight that I would only back. I could only back Nurse in. Obviously, location being a huge factor there. But
yeah,
I think Nurse is clearly that level for me.
I think it kind of summarises some of the issues in boxing, doesn't it? When you've got Nurse and Bradley Skeet are stuck at British level, and Ricky Burns is fighting. Sorry, a sort of a 35-year-old Ricky Burns or whatever is fighting in a unification. That really does kind of that emphasises some of boxing's kind of bottlenecks. And look, fair play to Burns for taking the fight and everything else.
Absolutely.
But it's a bit of a funny one because, like you say, he's probably about the same level as Tyrone Nurse, and one of them is sort of on a small hole show, and the other one is unifying titles. But anyway, we won't go down the Burns rabbit hole. I'll save that for a future episode. I had this mentioned on another podcast, actually, funnily enough, this afternoon when I was listening to it. And Paddy Cronin, who I know quite a few of us follow from the On the Grind podcast, who's a very good follow on Twitter. Paddy OTG, if you don't follow him already, he mentioned that he could see Chris Eubank having Paul Smith as his first defense of the IBO, and I thought that's horrible enough to actually happen. And then you'd have Paul Smith calling it a world title, and you'd have Hearn sort of bigging it up. If that, in a weird way, I'd actually really love that fight in a really horrible sort of masochistic way. Imagine that fight on pay-per-view.
Well, the question there, and strangely enough, that's a fight that's I think I've mentioned on Twitter previously, and actually has been kind of floating around in my head for the past couple of days for whatever reason. And the reason is I can remember why. I watched an interview with Paul Smith, I think it was a Liverpool Echo or something like that, and he was saying that, okay, he's got a couple of years, he wants to get a final crack at the world title, and it got me thinking, okay, Paul Smith, Chris Eubank Jr. for the IBO. If Paul Smith were to win that, is that his world title dream fulfilled? You know, does he consider the IBO the ultimate goal? Would he retire a happy man if he were to win that fight?
Would Hearn be able to say, right, I've got you your world title now, will you please retire and let me focus on on your brothers? Yeah, I know what you mean. He probably would, and I think Gallagher certainly would, and would claim that that was two of the four Smiths have now won world titles, and Stephen and Callum are going to complete the set and all the rest of it. And
I'd love to see that fight for that reason. Obviously, it would be promoted as a world title fight, which technically it is.
It would be pay-per-view. It would be amazing. Imagine Paul Smith headlining a pay-per-view. It'd be unbelievable. I actually love it. In a stupid way, I'd be actually tempted to buy it, especially if they had some stupid undercard. Maybe get Pricey back out of retirement on the undercard.
Right.
Price Harrison rematch or something as the chief support. Oh, it'd be brilliant. I love that fight. I hope they make it. I'd much rather that than Eubank getting exposed, against a guy like I don't know, fighting Saunders again and losing for a second time. Can I ask you actually just quickly, in terms of Eubank Jr. Obviously he's got quite a lot of places he can potentially go now. Whether he does go down any of the paths we want is another matter. But if the Billy Joe rematch happens, would you pick Saunders again? Or
I've always said yes. Up until recently, when certainly before the last fight, I've always said I backed Saunders to win the first fight.
Yeah, same. I made a bit of money on that. Yeah,
I certainly see the argument that people say, look, Eubank is the guy who's moved on, who's progressed more, and obviously Saunders has been kind of kicking his heels and not looking very good at all on the rare occasions he has been fighting. I certainly don't think we'll see it next. I think the talk is, from what Saunders is kind of intimating, that he'll be fighting a super fight. In his words, what that means, we're not quite sure. I don't put it this way. I don't think I would back Saunders to win that fight in a rematch.
You wouldn't. You'd back Eubank. Ah, interesting.
Well, I mean, obviously, it depends very much on the price, but I don't think I would kind of put money on it. Put it that way, because I think that's a fight that Eubank should win. Let's put it like that. I think he's got the skill set. He should have won the first fight in many kind of respects. He got off to a terrible start. He just kind of didn't do anything for the first half, and Saunders picked it up from there. In terms of looking at how the second fight would go, what can Saunders do? Saunders isn't a guy who's going to pick him apart and knock Eubank out. So I think he's going to let Eubank Jr. have the space to work, have the space to look good. And I think that's a fight Eubank would probably win a decent kind of 116, 112 decision on. It's not a fight I'm dying to see, frankly, but
no, I agree. Look, I'll watch it if they make it, but I'm not calling for it on Twitter or anything like that. Right. So okay. So we've done Paul Smith versus Eubank. Good. That was my priority. Getting you on. On the subject of, it actually segues quite nicely into another really fucking stupid fight that I've got absolutely no interest in. I'm hoping you won't have much to say on it either, but we have to mention it. McGregor versus Floyd. I haven't listened to a single interview with either of them. I'm not interested in what Dana White's saying. I'm not interested in what Ellaby's saying. I'm essentially ignoring it unless it actually gets signed, and then I'll probably tune in just because it's a kind of freak show. Do you think it will happen? Right. And do you have any interest at all on a sporting level?
I think in terms of the build up, I was sick of it 6 months ago. If they're going to make the fight. I'll watch the fight. I'll buy the pay-per-view, and millions of others will do the same. I'm not going to get excited about it until potentially fight week, and that's kind of out of a morbid curiosity, just because there's no debate as to the winner. It's a complete freak show. It would be huge from a sporting, or let's say a commercial point of view, and it would be absolute, massive in terms of the numbers and the hype around it. I don't want to see it. I really don't care one way or the other. I'd much rather see McGregor take on a Khabib or a reasonable fight. You're talking about kind of even stepping up and fighting Woodley.
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather
there are good fights. There are good fights for McGregor for him in his sport.
Exactly. I want to see him. You want to see him compete in his actual sport, not in this like freak show gimmick thing. Yeah, I agree.
It's nonsense. And and it's about as cynical a fight as you can possibly imagine. It would make a huge amount of money for both men, and frankly, I think it probably will happen. There was a point where I think it was talk and it was blustered. Now I think both guys are looking and thinking, it's, you know, if you're Floyd Mayweather, the best boxer of your generation, you're retired, and someone's waving the best part of 100 million in front of your nose to fight a guy who's not even a boxer. You know, let's
exactly, yeah. It's not as if he has a background in boxing before he went to MMA, is it? Like he's got no boxing background at all.
McGregor was an amateur boxer.
He was. Oh, right.
He was an amateur boxer, and he did I think fairly reasonably well in Ireland as a youngster. But he's not a boxer. You know, I wouldn't be excited about Floyd Mayweather coming back to rematch Andre Berto, and Andre Berto would beat McGregor in a boxing match without any shadow of a doubt. There is an argument, and it's a valid one, that fighters from other sports have stepped over into boxing and done pretty well. I think if you look at someone like Mundine, if you look at someone like obviously at a lower sort of domestic level, Curtis Woodhouse, these guys who haven't had any boxing background have come in and they've done all right for themselves.
Would you mind seeing Woodhouse against McGregor? Would you pay for that?
I probably would pay for that.
I actually think that would be quite a good fight, to be perfectly honest. But it's a bit like you know, when James Toney or whoever goes into UFC, I have no interest in watching it because you just know that within 30 seconds the guy will break his arm or break his ankle or whatever it is and just get him in a submission.
Right.
Do you think Floyd knocks McGregor out? Let's say it's, I don't know, if it's an 8-round fight or something stupid like that, or do you think Floyd goes to a decision and just stinks it out?
No, I absolutely do. I'd never really considered that Mayweather would knock McGregor out.
He has got a good chin, McGregor, hasn't he? I know,
and he's a bigger man. You know, he's fought at 170. I think he's naturally bigger, and he's used to the weight. And he's an immensely tough guy. I think Mayweather would. I think it would be a 12-round fight first and foremost. I think.
Oh, okay.
And I think Mayweather is not coming back into boxing to get into a slugfest. He would be there, as he did against obviously Berto. He'd
carry him for 12.
That safety first. You know, he's not going to go out there and blitz him. It's not worth the risk.
I've still never watched Mayweather Berto. Strangely enough, I've got absolutely no interest in ever watching.
Oh, really?
it. No, I didn't watch it at the time. I think I was on holiday when it happened, and I just never sort of bothered to watch it. And then I realised about a year later, I've never watched that fight. I've got no interest in it. I probably will never watch it because it's just, you know, we all knew exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
The minute it was signed. But yeah. Anyway, that's by the by.
As we do in a McGregor Mayweather fight.
Yes.
But again, I would certainly watch it.
Yeah, I probably would tune in as well, to be honest, and somehow try and convince myself that it was there was sort of scope for an upset. I managed to absolutely convince myself Pacquiao was going to knock him out. I was so excited in that fight. I was the same as everyone else. Like until a week before, I was super cynical. I was telling my brother watches about one fight every 2 or 3 years, and he was emailing me saying, "Sort of right, how's it? You know, I'm watching it with all my mates. What's going to happen? What's your prediction?" And I kept saying, "Look, Floyd's going to win a really boring decision. You know, the fight won't be that good. Don't get your hopes up." And then about a week before, I just completely went all in with it, and I was like, "No, do you know what? I think I saw a video of I think it might have been the 24/7, but I saw Pacquiao shadow boxing. I was like, oh my God, he looks amazing. This is, and I just completely convinced myself. And I was unbelievably hyped up for it. And then after about 3 rounds, I went, yeah, why did I? Well, the hope has killed me here.
That's a fight. I never had any, I say never, I didn't have any real doubt that what was going to happen. I actually thought, the shout I gave on that was that I thought Mayweather might pick him apart more than he did, and potentially maybe kind of even look to stop him. 9 or 10 rounds in, that's but it was always Mayweather for me, and I think that's how it played out.
My only memory, really, sort of positive memory, was the first round when Pacquiao sort of was very aggressive, and Floyd it's one of the best rounds I've ever seen from anyone. Right. He got the jab to the body going immediately and just stopped him in his tracks 3 or 4 times, and then you just knew, okay, that's game over. It's the Mayweather decision. Yeah,
absolutely. As you said earlier with Garcia Slitichin in that that first round set the tone, and from there that's what it was going to be.
Yeah, you knew Pacquiao needed a miracle, but yeah, again, that's a fight I've never watched that fight back ever, and I probably never will. See no reason to ever do it. Let's move on to sort of more positive stuff. Some really good fights that have been made recently. Biggest of all, obviously, I think it was announced on Tuesday, if I'm recalling, but Brook versus Spence happening at some point in May,
right?
For the IBF belt at 147. Now, again, let's put a slight twist on this. First question: will it be pay-per-view?
Yes.
Oh, you think it will? Okay, because I've seen a bit of debate on Twitter about this.
No, I think it will absolutely be pay-per-view, and I think that's a direct result of not of Spence, but I think of Brook's showing against Golovkin, which is another fight where the first round told you everything that you needed to know.
Yeah.
I think it will absolutely be pay-per-view. I think Brook is enough of a big name in this in the UK now to carry it. How well it will sell, I'm not sure, but I think it will absolutely be pay-per-view.
Are there any fights you could sort of? What would you look for on the undercard? I mean, it's a London show. You'd think, oh God, I don't know. They haven't got Kevin Mitchell anymore, have they? I'm trying to think of sort of London names that could pull the punters in.
Well, I think they're talking about that in Sheffield and Bramall Lane, presumably.
Yeah, I'm really sceptical about that. To me, that's an O2 fight, and it would probably sell the O2 out and do really well. I mean, I don't know. Bramall Lane seems a bit, and isn't it in May? Won't this? Well, I suppose it would be right after the season finished, wouldn't it?
They're talking. I believe it was who tweeted it. I think it was Ron Lewis. They're talking May the 27th, I believe, which is after the playoffs will be finished, presumably. Obviously, United kind of get past that. I think it could do okay at Bramall Lane. I think if you draw a parallel to say Bellew, Makubu at Goodison, I think Brook has enough of a following. This is a really legitimate fight.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind seeing it in a stadium. It's not a stadium fight in the sense that obviously a Joshua Fury is, or even a Brook Khan, let's say, but it's a fight that would do decent numbers, and I think it would certainly sell out the O2 if not a little bit more.
Yeah, well, that was one of the questions we had in today. How many tickets will Brook versus Spence do? Do you think it would sell more than 15,000? I think is the O2 15K? Is that the capacity?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think
it would.
I think it would sell the O2 out. I'm not sure it would do whatever. I mean, Bramall Lane, bloody hell, it's a pretty big stadium. That must be 35,000 or so.
35,000, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure it would sell that many, but I do think yeah, maybe 20,000.
Well, I think if you look at just trying to think, something like Hay versus Chisora, I don't think it sold Upton Park out, but it sold enough for it to warrant being in a stadium. I might be wrong on that, actually. Maybe it did, but it's an outdoor fight. Put it in May. Summer even, that's a decent event. I think that would do very well.
Yeah, and a good example of that, Mitchell Katsidis, one of my favourite fights of all time.
Yes,
genuinely one of my favourite fights ever. That was up to Bart, wasn't it? But the whole stadium wasn't open. I think they probably had about 12,000 in there, something like that.
Right.
But it was big enough to justify the what's the word? The pageantry, as they say on HBO.
That said, Brook sold very well at the O2 for Golovkin. Obviously, Golovkin is more of a name than Spence, and brought along people who were there to see him. But I think Brook showed that he's a decent ticket seller in his own right.
Yeah, I agree. He's not some unknown sort of Quig level guy who really struggles to sell anything. I agree with you on that. Well, you know what I'm going to ask next is have you made a prediction yet? How do you see it going, or do you think it's a bit early to say?
I haven't kind of settled on it, and a lot of that is kind of waited around on the venue. I think it's very easy to make a case for both guys in this fight, and I'm a big Spence fan, and I rate Brook highly as well. I think it's a fight that, whether it's in Sheffield, whether it's in London, the kind of the cards are in not the cards in a judge's sense, but the odds are stacked in Brook's favour. Let's put it that way. He's going to have the crowd on his side. He's going to. I don't think he's going to knock Spence out, and I think if that goes 12 rounds, barring something that's a real kind of clinic from Spence, I think that's a fight that Brook would have every chance of kind of eking out a decision in.
Yeah, I mean, if he could be up on the judges' scorecards after 5 rounds against Golovkin, then he's not losing a decision to Spence unless he gets absolutely flattened. Yeah, I agree with you. Correct. I think Spence would need a knockout, but then again, he's a guy who does fight for the knockout every time. So,
and I think that's that's possible. I mean, Brook is a very strong guy. Clearly, he was obviously hurt from Golovkin shots, but he stood up to them. I don't think I'm not sure I can see Spence knocking him out. I think it's a distance fight. I would have to edge with Brook, but it's by the slimmest of margins. It's a great fight.
I think there could be some good money to be made on it because I've seen very, very few Americans are giving Brook a chance. It's a bit of a Calzaghe-Lacey situation. I mean, Mike Coppinger, the USA Today, I tweeted that I saw Spence Brook as a 50-50, and the venue, as you said, would sort of sway me one way or the other. I said it was basically Brook's uppercut against Spence's body shots, and right. Mike Coppinger immediately replied saying Spence will dominate and knock him out. He's levels above Brook, and I don't see that at all either way. I don't think either guy's levels above the other. I think it's a very, very, very good fight. I think the best you could say is 60-40 in favor of one guy.
Oh, I think I would kind of respectfully factor in who's given that opinion.
Yeah.
I don't think it's anyone who calls a clear winner in that fight is going out on a limb and speculating, because we haven't seen enough of Spence. Well, we haven't been sent at this level that Brook is going to bring.
No, and to be honest, we haven't seen Brook at this level either.
No, we haven't.
We've seen him at that level in what, maybe 2 or 3 fights?
At middleweight.
No, sorry, I mean in terms of his welterweight, in terms of being in with top welterweights. Well, we've only seen it once, haven't we? Really,
one fight. Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of unknowns, which is funny for a guy who's had a belt for a number of years now, and has obviously has headlined pay-per-views. There's still a lot we don't know about Brook, I guess. I know what you mean. I do think it will come down to the uppercuts and the body shots. I think if you could design a fighter, I think Brook is very tough to stop. And I agree with you that I think it probably goes the distance. But if you are going to stop him, I think it will be with body shots. And Spence is possibly the best body shot thrower in that division. But equally, I've seen Spence wobble before. Brook is a very accurate puncher. Brook has very, very strong legs, I've noticed. I think he holds his ground incredibly well. And Spence is a guy who likes to drive his opponents back and get them on the back foot. And I think each guy will be sort of surprised by how good the other is, if that makes sense.
No, I absolutely agree. I think the other thing, obviously, is Spence is a southpaw, and that's certainly if we're talking about guys Brook has faced at any kind of elite level, this is a new challenge for him as well. I think it's a fight that I think Brook will edge it on the jab. I think that's one of his main advantages there. And I think if he boxes safe, it's a fight he can win. But it's very, very tough indeed.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I haven't sort of. I'm still on the fence largely. I think if you put a gun to my head now and say pick a winner, I would go Brook on points. But equally, there really isn't an outcome that would shock me, because I think both guys, both are hard enough punchers and good enough fighters to hurt the other. So Spence knocking Brook out in 8 or 9 rounds wouldn't shock me. I mean, he's certainly good enough to knock out champions, but equally, Brook sort of taking Brook into deep waters and countering him and all the rest of it, that wouldn't necessarily shock me either. So it's a brilliant fight. Either way, I really don't. I've not seen very many people criticizing it, to be fair, but I do think it's a fantastic fight. And
well, I think Brook, and this may prove to be one of his kind of key advantages. He's vastly more experienced than Spence is.
Yeah.
Albeit not necessarily at the top level, but he's been around a hell of a lot longer. Yeah, I think. Well,
and he's been 12 so many times, hasn't he? I don't think Spence has ever been 12, if I'm right. I'm gonna check that now. Sorry, please keep going.
I think the only outcome, frankly, that would surprise me is a Spence kind of 120, 108 type decision or scorecards, because either way, however way he wins, I think it's going to be much closer than that from the judges.
Yeah, Spence has been. He's been. How many rounds was this fight? Where are we? He's been 10 rounds once. That's it. That's the furthest he's ever been.
Right, and that's not for kind of 2 or 3 years at least.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That was a while ago. So yeah, potentially it could be a Brook. The later rounds could be very telling in that one. But anyway, fantastic fight, and we're going to be positive about it and not pick holes. I'll even forgive the pay-per-view stuff, because if they can stick a decent undercard on, look, it's a quality main event.
Well, and I think on that note, it's a pay-per-view fight in terms of quality. You know, if we're talking, the argument about pay-per-view is, well, are they a big enough name? Are they going to sell enough? Are they going to do enough buys? What we don't often look at in terms of pay-per-view is the quality of the fight. And Brook Spence is as good a fight as can be made pretty much in welterweight. Obviously, you've got Garcia Furman coming up as well. If you're judging a pay-per-view fight purely on the quality and caliber of the fight, it's a pay-per-view fight.
Yeah, see, again, we're going to have another disagreement here. Probably end up falling out, because my logic with pay-per-view is always, can the fight be made without pay-per-view? And if the answer is yes, then it's not a pay-per-view fight. So obviously, Pacquiao Mayweather could not have been made on regular TV ever. So that was a pay-per-view fight. Klitschko Joshua could not be made on regular TV. So that's 100% a pay-per-view fight. No issue with it at all. Right. I think Spence will not command the biggest purse. I know Brook. Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, it's going to purse bids. I don't think it is pay-per-view, but I agree with you that the fight is good enough, and especially if we look at some of the other shite, I know it's been called off, but stuff like Cotto Kirkland being on pay-per-view, one win between them in the last 3 years or whatever. When that's a pay-per-view, then it's hard to complain about Spence and Brook. But I just don't think, I think it's mainly that maybe if Brook was fighting a unification against a guy like Garcia or Thurman, that could be justified as pay-per-view, because they would command millions to come over. Whereas I just don't think Spence would be getting that much money. And I think that financially it could be done on regular TV.
He's not, because, obviously he's the mandatory challenger.
Yeah, he'll be getting a couple of $100,000, won't he? Maybe.
Well,
£250,000.
Let's again on pay-per-view, maybe more. But let's be clear. I'm certainly not advocating pay-per-view where it's not required. But what pay-per-view shouldn't be, I think, certainly from a fan's perspective, to say, okay, well, this guy's going to win a lot of money. Let's say, let's take Hey Bellew as an example. Hey will not fight for a few quid. Bellew wants a payday. That's going to need pay-per-view to be.
Oh yeah, that fight couldn't be made on regular Sky. I agree.
But clearly, as a sporting contest, it's not. I don't think it's pay-per-view worthy. If pay-per-views and they are a necessary evil. And if you're picking a few fights out of the schedule to say, right, this is going to be a pay-per-view fight, I'd rather Brook Spence was made than Cotto Kirkland, or
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, if someone says, yeah, exactly. Considering some of the utter shite that gets stuck on pay-per-view, and I feel Green Mundine. You mentioned him earlier. That was a pay-per-view fight for some. So in a world where that is justified as pay-per-view. We can't really complain about Brook and Spence. But to me, if you look at something like the Frampton Santa Cruz rematch, loads of people were saying that should have been pay-per-view. And do you remember Hearn said, if Frampton was a matchroom fighter, that fight would have been on pay-per-view, etc., etc. That's fine. If they put it on pay-per-view, I wouldn't have been outraged. But equally, it was a fight where financially you had the sort of you had the room to maneuver to get it on regular TV. And I do think that, if push comes to shove, Sky could afford to put Brook Spence on regular.
Well, I think, obviously there, what we have to bear in mind is the market. Frampton Santa Cruz is not going to be a pay-per-view fight on Showtime pay-per-view, for example.
Yeah.
We can live in hope. Bellew Makabu, a fantastic fight. It was made. It wasn't on pay-per-view. It was a worthy. I was fairly surprised it wasn't on pay-per-view, being a stadium fight. And so
I think that was because Makabu was he was on very low pay. I think it was one of those weird ones. He was on. I remember being quite shocked at his purse. I think it was less than $100,000 or whatever, because he was mandatory, or however it worked out. And I think that was sort of what managed to that allowed them to keep it. Whereas maybe Bellew against a guy like Lebedev obviously would have been on pay-per-view, because he would have been commanding a far bigger purse. We won't. I'm really trying to ignore the fact that Bellew Hay is happening. I'm not interested at all. It's just, you know, it's. But I completely agree with you. That fight can only happen on pay-per-view. I just don't think it should be happening at all. So
well, I don't. To be honest, I think Bellew is. I'm going to kind of confess it. It's a fight that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing because it's. And I'm not going to say that from a sporting perspective because I think it's going to be a huge event. I may even be there, but it's
where is it? Is it at the O2?
The O2. It's okay. The O2. But for me, it's closer to Mayweather McGregor than anything else. I think it's an absolute mismatch, and that's someone Bellew. I admire him quite a lot, and I think he's looked fantastic in his last couple of fights. Well, certainly against Makabu, he did, and we know what he did to Flores. But it's a cash out. It's a cash out. It's a freak show. It's a freak show. Hayes going to demolish him.
I'm actually quite worried about Bellew. I think he could get really badly hurt. Genuinely, it could be a sort of Hatton Pacquiao style KO.
I think it works. I don't think it's going to be particularly prolonged.
No.
Hay, as we saw in his last couple of fights, or I mean his last fight rather, not in the fight before, he'll start. I think he'll size up Bellew in the first round, but I don't think I'd be amazed if that goes more than 5. And I think it probably ends within 3 rounds.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would be astonished if Bellew won or if it went past about 6 rounds. Unless Hayes put money on what round he's going to win it again, which you never know. He's the sort of guy who might do that. Right, now I'm aware that we're about an hour and a half. Okay, so we'll skip over the rest of these and then just do a quick preview of the weekend. There's not much on, but interrupt me if you've got anything to say on any of the following. Where Amir Khan goes next, and feel free to stay silent if you don't want to talk about it. That's fine. Hughie Fury against Joseph Parker.
You may have to interrupt me here because
go
I'm tempted to stay silent for a few of these.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So we've got Parker versus Fury. If you've got anything to say on that, I think that's been confirmed for, I think it's April in New Zealand for the WBO belt. Hughie Fury mysteriously able to fight again after being inactive with absolutely no explanation given.
And Tyson Fury also announcing his return, I think, for April as well.
But very strange that. What a coincidence.
Coincidence.
Yeah. Canelo against Chavez again. I'm just trying to ignore the fact that this is really happening. I think
that's that seems to be the trend at the moment. These kind of big money fights. I think that's it's kind of a Mexican equivalent of Hey Bellew in some respects. It's going to do huge numbers.
Yeah, it will sell a stadium out, won't it? For sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
I am seeing a few saying that Chavez actually has a chance if he comes in shape. Obviously, that's always the caveat with Chavez. I think personally he should just fuck it off, pay £500,000 and come in at like 190 and just try and just sort of lean on Canelo and do it like a Klitschko.
I believe actually that fight is. I'm pretty sure actually that he's contracted that every pound he misses, which is 164. He owes Canelo $1 million. So that's been stipulated that that's not what he's going to be able to do. Canelo's team is very wise to that.
Yeah, and you think I don't know if it's really worth coming in at 170 and taking a $6 million hit.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not. Again, I will probably watch it, but I actually think it'll be quite a boring fight, and I think it will go 12, and I think Canelo will win pretty much every round. I actually don't think it'll be very exciting. I think it's a big lump against a guy who's much more skillful but a bit smaller.
I think pretty boring. It's a heavy bag session, I think, for Canelo.
Rios Pacquiao, but somehow on an even lower level. Yeah, somehow inexplicably. Right. So if we forget that, the more sort of pressing question for actual fans is let's assume Canelo wins. Do you think he fights Golovkin in September?
No.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't think it's going to happen either. Yeah.
I don't think it will. I think there'll be more bullshit as to why it won't happen. I wouldn't be surprised if we never see that fight at all. Obviously, there's only 2 dates a year that's going to happen, and that's obviously May or September. If it doesn't happen in September, it's going to happen. Is it going to happen in May? I'm not convinced at all.
I could easily see Canelo sitting the rest of the year out, with a fake injury or whatever else it is. I've hurt my hand or whatever. I need 9 months out.
And I think the thing with that is, again, wake me up when it's made. I'll happily watch it. It's a good fight. I don't think it's the fight to save boxing, or the super fight that some people are calling it. Or, I mean, obviously it's a super fight, but it's not a. I just don't think it's the kind of be all and end all that some are making out. I think some have kind of latched onto it as the next Mayweather Pacquiao, because that's what they feel needs to happen. I don't think it's that good a fight. And
I don't think it would. I don't think it would turn Golovkin into a household name either, even if he wins really well. I think the ship has kind of sailed on Golovkin becoming a superstar. I think he'll be very popular and be able to draw big crowds within boxing, but I don't think he'll ever be a household name.
Well, I think the question with that is, and I think Golovkin wins that. I wouldn't want to say comfortably, but I think he wins it fairly widely. I think if he doesn't stop Canelo, he would be. Is Canelo a household name? That's the question. In Mexico, he's not a household name in the truest sense of the form. In the US, even he's a big name, and certainly in certain circles. But Golovkin would elevate his status, obviously. But the question is then, where does he go next after that? It's I don't think there's enough options or certainly kind of high-profile options for Golovkin after that fight to kind of put him into real. Kind of crossover status, and
exactly. It's not like Pacquiao, where he fought De La Hoya, and then everyone was saying, well, if he beats De La Hoya, he's then got a dozen different opponents for pay-per-view. Yeah, Golovkin doesn't really have anywhere to go. Maybe up to 168. I'm not that interested in seeing him up at 168. I think he'd be quite visibly smaller than pretty much everyone else. The one, actually, funnily enough, on this subject, and this has been mentioned quite a few times in the chat. Today, I don't know if you've seen this, but Jamal Charlo announced that he's vacating his IBF 154 belt. And I did. Middleweight. Now, again, assuming that Golovkin beats Jacobs, as I'm sure we both agree that he probably will, or he should.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Then, would you like to see Charlo in the near future? Let's give him a couple of fights to acclimatize to 160. And more importantly, do you think Charlo could give Golovkin a good fight? Because I actually think, assuming he can kind of take a punch up at 160, not saying he's got an iron sort of Daniel Zaragoza chin, but if he can take a punch to a reasonable extent at 160, I think Charlo's got some tools which could give Golovkin problems.
I think there's definitely an argument, actually, that I think, again, obviously, let's see how he looks at middleweight first, but I think there's an argument that Charlo gives Golovkin a tougher fight than Jacobs will. I think the way that Charlo's built, he's a big guy. He's got a chin, I think, which
he's got a fantastic jab as well. Unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Jacobs has a puncher's chance against Golovkin, and that's about it. If he doesn't win inside a couple of rounds, which I don't think he will, I think that's again, one-way traffic. I think Charlo Golovkin is a decent fight in a year or so, maybe even sooner.
You could have that next May, couldn't you, if Canelo falls through or whatever?
You could. I think the other guy who's obviously down at 154 at the moment is Adrien, and he's kind of scratching around looking for a big fight as well. And I think
well, he's got Kulkai, hasn't he? That's been agreed again. I think he's going to Germany next.
That's
month.
on. That's on. Clearly, that's not a fight that I'm going to get too excited about. But
you're not travelling for that one, no?
No. It's a shame that we're not going to see Charlo versus Adrien at light middle. But I think there's a shame that we wouldn't see, let's say, Adrien. I don't think that's going to happen. Adrien Lara or Charlo Lara as well. I think those are good fights. I think Adrien gives Golovkin a decent fight if he were to step up and if he were to kind of acclimatise as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think he's built to go up to 160 as well.
Those are the guys that I'd like to see Golovkin in against. I think they're for me in a pure boxing sense, they're as interesting as Canelo. Obviously, Canelo's a much bigger fight, but I'd rather see Golovkin in against those than stepping up to 168. The only reason I wanted to see Golovkin kind of move up to super middle was around the time that Ward was he was sitting out at the time. That would have been a fantastic fight at 168. Obviously now Ward has kind of moved on and may never kind of come back again. There's no one really at kind of super middle that I'm desperate to see Golovkin against now.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think in terms of the opponents who are at 160 now, if we take Charlo out of there because he's literally just arrived, there aren't that many middleweights I'm particularly interested in putting Golovkin in with. Canelo aside, you know, I'm not that interested in the Jacobs fight, to be honest. I think it's a very, very routine knockout win for Golovkin. I've never been that impressed with Jacobs. I think he's just his defense isn't that good, his chin isn't that good, and like you say, he will try and blitz Golovkin for a couple of rounds. And then as soon as he starts to slow down, he's finished.
I think it's a little bit like the Lemieux fight in that respect. I think Jacobs will be a little busier than Lemieux was. He hugely disappointing in that fight, but it was always going to be kind of thus. I
think Jacobs will really struggle to cope with the pressure and the cutting off the ring and all the rest of it. I think mentally he will be sort of. It will be claustrophobic for him, if you know what I mean. From the opening bell, I think he'll be shocked at how a lot of the opponents still seem to have this idea that Golovkin's quite robotic and sort of a 1-2 kind of guy. But as soon as they get in the ring, you can see their expression change. You know, it was the same with Kovalev against Hopkins. Do you remember Hopkins' face after about 30 seconds? He suddenly realised, oh shit, like he's a lot better than I thought he was.
And obviously, kind of Curtis Stevens with his kind of expression after he got knocked down against Golovkin as well. You know, people do have that realisation, and I think, to be honest, part of the reason that I wouldn't be surprised. Or I don't think, rather, that Golovkin-Canelo is going to happen, is because I wouldn't be surprised to see Golovkin-Saunders happen later in the year. As I said earlier, Saunders keeps hinting, perhaps it's nothing, perhaps it's bullshit, that he's got a super fight coming. He's going to have to step up and fight, if not Eubank, someone at middleweight, and I wouldn't totally be surprised if that was Golovkin later this year.
The one I always thought made sense was Saunders Canelo, but they seem to have gone completely quiet on that. I'm not sure why. Yeah. I thought that made sense for both guys and gave both guys a very good excuse not to go near Golovkin. But we'll see how it goes. Right now, just a couple of others. You mentioned it's a shame that we won't get to see Lara against Andrade or Charlo or whoever at 154. Right. What we might be able to see Lara in a good fight soon, however, because they've announced today again that the Jarrett Hurd against Tony Harrison fight, which was scheduled for next weekend, will now be for the IBF belt, the vacant belt. Yes. I think that's a very, very good fight. Jarrett Hurd is a guy I've again, similar mold to Andrade and Charlo, very tall, very long arms for the division. Looks like a guy who could easily move up through the weights. I think he'll beat Harrison quite handily, and for the first time in a few years, we'll have a champion who isn't in the same fucking gym as Erislandy Lara, and so can actually fight him.
Right. So or not kind of related.
Yeah, exactly. Or brother of another champion. Yeah. So we could actually see unifications at 154 for the first time in God knows how long. I'm trying to think of the last time there was a unification at light middle. It was years and years ago because Canelo Lara wasn't even for the belts, was it? That was I think that was a non-title fight. I think it was at 155. I think that one, because Canelo said he didn't want to. Yeah. For some reason, he didn't care about the belt or whatever. I don't think there's been a unification in that division for years and years. So hopefully that might be on the horizon. But yeah, Hurd Harrison, very good fight. Looking forward to that one.
I agree. I think you're right. I think Hurd wins that fight. I think he could even stop Harrison.
I think he could knock him out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Hurd is. You know, obviously he's got a lot to do yet, but that's the sort of fight that puts him in the picture. You know, maybe against Jamel Charlo, I think that's a decent fight.
Yeah, Jamel Charlo's fighting his mandatory in a couple of weeks, I think. So hopefully he'll be free later in the year to unify potentially. Yeah.
And that's a fight he wins without problems as well.
Yeah, who's he fighting? Hatley, isn't it?
Charles Hatley, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a nonsense mandatory with a Donald King fighter. But yeah, so yeah, Hurd Harrison, good PBC fight, and a couple of other good PBC fights, if you've got anything to say on these. Williams Jr. against Marcus Brown. Nice little shootout fight.
It's a good fight, isn't it? I think it's it could go either way. I don't think it would be. Well,
you might as well make it a 4-rounder, right? Because it's not. Yeah, it's not going to go
12 rounds. Put it that way. I would.
I think I'm picking Williams. I think maybe to stop Brown. I think Brown's a bit. I think Williams is kind of a bit more seasoned and has experience of being in these types of fights, whereas Brown doesn't really.
It's a fight that Brown is going to be, meant to. He's meant to win that fight, but
yeah, he is.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Williams Jr. won that at all. I think 3 or 4 rounds tops, and we're done. Yeah,
and another one again. You'd actually, I don't know. You'd hope it would end in a knockout quite early, but Fonfara against Chad Dawson. Again, it's kind of, Chad Dawson's completely washed up, but I actually don't mind. I don't mind the fight. I'll watch it. Again, that kind of is what it is. I think that's going to tell us a lot about Fonfara. Obviously, he was on quite a decent run before Smith Jr. He should be knocking Dawson out early. I'll watch it. I think it's an okay fight. Yeah, it's decent. I sort of looked at it and thought, what's the angle here? And then I realised actually it's not really an angle. It's just Dawson's kind of got no options. Fonfara need to win, so yeah, stick them in together.
And it's a decent name on Fonfara's record, and he's building up. He's got a couple of those already. So Dawson still has some name value. It's a fight that he should win, and if he does, then he's beating Chad Dawson. Fantastic.
Is that me? No, sorry. I thought I was getting an echo for some reason. My headphones playing up. Right, now we've got a few listener questions, just a couple before we go on to. I know Broner's your favourite fighter, so we'll go on to him shortly. So let me just load these up. We actually had one a moment ago, which was where are we? Tom, addressed to you. Are you going to be betting on Bobby Gunn when he fights Roy Jones this weekend?
No, I'm not. I've got better things to do with my money. I wouldn't even bet on Jones Jr. Put it that way.
He's a massive favourite. You think, fucking hell, Roy, he's like a 25-1 on favourite or something ridiculous. And you think,
I mean,
this age being that big a favourite, I don't know. Shaky.
No one should be betting on a Roy Jones Jr. fight in
exactly.
At this point, let's leave that one alone.
Now we've had a few sort of gambling questions now.
Okay.
And this is one that I've been mulling myself, so keen to hear what you think. Is an Avanesian Granados double good value? I think that would be it would probably be 7 or 8 to 1.
I think it'd probably be maybe a little bit bigger,
maybe slightly more. Yeah, I really think this is made for Broner. But
sorry, what was the question?
Is an Avanesian to beat Peterson and a Granados to beat Broner a value? Is that a value double? Oh no, it's at 14 to 1 apparently, the double.
I think that's playing kind of very hard and fast with the term value from a kind of a betting sense. I mean, there's an argument doubles, should be well avoided at the best of times. No, put it this way, I don't think it's value. It's certainly not value in that sense. I don't think it will come in. Frankly,
I can see Avanesian winning though, because I think Peterson's been very, very inactive.
Yeah,
I
can.
He started to look old in the last few fights, and he is old. I think he's 34 now or something. Peterson.
Put it this way, I'd rather back that than go near Bobby Gunn, Roy Jones Jr. It's got a lot of work to do, but it's.
I don't think I'm going to.
It'll keep you entertained.
I don't think I'm going to go near Granados either. I'm not sure about that main event, especially now the weight's changed. I think Broner it's all set up for Broner to have a big performance. I think.
I haven't been convinced about that since it was signed, and I know that Showtime came out with their kind of pack schedule, and Broner Granados was what's that doing on there kind of thing. I don't think it's a particularly great fight. Granados is game. He's gonna probably come to scrap, but I think Broner can still turn it on. Broner is good. He's a good fighter when he fancies it.
And Granados will be right in front of him to be hit, won't he? The entire fight.
If Broner turns up, that I don't think it's a particularly tricky fight for Broner at all. The question with every Broner fight is what Broner turns up.
Well, I'll be interested to see if he makes 147 tomorrow, because he's blown. I think he's blown weight in 3 of the last 4.
Yeah, I mean the thing with that fight, and I think people obviously are looking for ways for Broner to lose, because who doesn't like seeing that? But people kind of drawing parallels, I think, with Maidana and saying, Granados is this pressure fight, he's going to cause Broner all sorts of problems. I don't see it myself, and potentially this is famous last words. We'll see, but yeah, it's not a fight I'm particularly excited about, frankly.
I agree. I think it got quite a lot of hype when it was announced as being a kind of this could be an upset. And then I sort of looked at it and I thought everyone who's saying it's an upset has seen Granados fight once. Like, there's just no way they've seen him more than that, because you know the guy he's a good fighter. He's a gatekeeper, Granados. I think if you're not beating him, you're not going to go to the top in the division. And he's lost some very close decisions, which could easily have gone the other way. But he's going to be tiny at 147. And I know Broner's not a welterweight really, but I just think Broner's going to be a lot bigger than him. If you look at, you know, their biceps, their shoulders, all the rest of it, I think Broner will, like you said, Broner will have to have a really bad night to lose. But I think so. You can never rule it out, because he's had very, very bad nights more than once before.
Yeah, he has. I think there's a clear distinction there, as I think there isn't a lot of kind of other examples I can think of. There's a distinction between thinking who's going to win and who you want to win, and I think people looking at Granados are saying, yeah, I really want Broner to lose. This is a fight that potentially could cause him problems stylistically. For me, I wouldn't be tempted into a Granados bet unless he was certainly a touch bigger in the prices.
And then the other question sent in was if we know anything about Brook and Spence drug testing. And I'm assuming, as it's the IBF, there won't be VADA. And I guess Brook would just be UCAD, I'm guessing. I don't know how sort of au fait you are with drug testing and all that stuff.
I haven't heard anything about the procedure for that fight, and I think it's certainly too early to say. You know, it hasn't been officially announced, terms have been agreed, but I don't think we'll hear until a little bit further down the line.
No, and you know, Brooks famously, I remember with the Porter fight, there was a big old mix-up about drug testing and all the rest of it. So he's obviously not a guy who cares that much about whether his opponents are taking the tests or not.
Yeah, you know, but then it's fair to say there have been some question marks about Spence, and rightly so. And I think it's something that, you know, we certainly should see VADA testing for. I think we both realise that we won't, certainly not 24/7.
No, and it sends out the wrong message, doesn't it? When guys don't bother. Yeah. Right, I think that's all the previews. Unless there was anything else you wanted to say on Peterson, I think if there's, I don't know what the odds are on Avanesian, but I would say if there's a value underdog bet, it would be him to beat Peterson, who I thought definitely lost to Diaz last time out.
Right, and I think I actually backed Shane Mosley to beat Avanesian kind of last time, so that's one that I regretted.
Oh, I got that one right, actually. I remember seeing a few picking Mosley, and I just thought the Mosley I'd seen in the sort of 2 or 3 years before that was an absolute shell of himself. I thought that, and then Avanesian's one of those guys, isn't he, where he's sort of 7 out of 10 in everything. Not particularly good. You can never write home about him, but he doesn't make stupid mistakes. And Peterson isn't a sensational guy in any one area.
No, listen, and I think Mosley, that was let's not forget, a Mosley funded pay-per-view. You know, a DIY kind of job, and I figured at the time that was going to play into his hands. Obviously, that's not the way it worked out. And I think Avanesian, I think he's solid in every respect. He's limited, but he doesn't do much wrong. I think 3-1. If there is a value bet this weekend, it is probably him.
Is he 3-1?
He's 3-1. Yeah.
I tell you what, I'll stick a tenner on that or so. I think that's a decent bet.
Obviously the red flag on that is that Peterson has kind of been getting the rub of the green, let's say, on the decisions.
Yeah, I feel like it might be about time when sort of maybe the promoters decide that Peterson's sort of he's a faded star and they don't really need to pump too much more into him. I think with fair judging, I'd definitely be tempted with Avanesian. Tom, we've just got one more question before I let you go. Appreciate we've been on nearly 2 hours now, but if Broner could make 140 again and he and Burns both win, do you think Burns will finally go to America and cash out? Do you think that will be his sort of last hurrah? Because I mean, it's a fight that's been talked about for like 5 years, isn't it, or so?
Yeah, it has. I'm not convinced that would be the case. Purely for at least in part for the fact that Burns would then presumably be a unified champion. I don't think he's going to go to probably get beaten up by Adrien Broner in the US. I think there's a chance that Broner will come to the UK for that. I think that's where the money would be. I don't see Burns kind of giving everything up to drop both titles, lose, and retire on that. No, I don't see that happening.
And do you know what? I mean, you cannot. We talk about selling to the casuals. If you're selling a fight to the casuals, Broner is. Imagine Broner on The Gloves Are Off or something on Sky. Like that fight would sell huge numbers of tickets or whatever if they put that in a stadium. Maybe that's where the money is. Yeah, you're right. I hadn't really thought about it like that. But I mean, I'd be tempted to go, and I wouldn't care about who won. And I'm not a fan of either guy. And I don't think either guy is close to being the best in the division. But I'd probably be tempted to, if it was anywhere near me in England, I'd probably be quite tempted to go and watch it live.
Yeah. I think honestly, if Burns were to, obviously he needs to get past Ndongo, which I think he probably will. I think if he was going to say, right, this is the last hurrah, let's kind of roll the dice, I think it would go for the Crawford rematch. I'd like to see that, because then that would put us in a position where Crawford would literally hold everything at 140. All of the alphabets.
Yeah, because Crawford's got WBO and WBC, hasn't he, at the moment? And then
yeah.
Burns has remind me. Burns has got the WBA. I think.
Burns WBA, Ndongo IBF.
Okay.
So I mean that would be fantastic, because that was a clean sweep for Crawford. He would win the rematch. Burns would say, well, he gave it a go at one of the pound for pound best.
Yeah, absolutely no shame in losing to Terence Crawford. Yeah. Everyone's a winner.
That makes more sense to me than a Broner. And Burns would travel. He'd probably get screwed at the weight again. And also we're relying there on Broner going down to 140. Broner couldn't make.
Which he hasn't made for about 3 years.
Couldn't make his own catch weight, could he? So he, against Granada. So I don't think we're going to see Broner at 140 now. It's
quite poor this, because I mean we've already seen that Broner really has no business at 147. He's just not big enough. And can you imagine Broner in with I don't know, Kell Brook or Errol Spence? They would be significantly bigger than him.
Right. Broner's what, 5'5", 5'6",
and he's just like you say, he's very kind of at 147. He's very thick, whereas you look at Brook and Spence, and they are shredded down to the bone to make 147. It's a different weight class really, and it's a shame if he fucks it up, because I mean I'd love to see Broner get beat up by someone like Crawford. I'd really enjoy watching that, but
right.
But it probably won't happen, because he'll never bother to make 140 again. But
absolutely.
But there we go. I think that was everything. There are literally no other fights apart from Roy Jones this weekend. It's quite thin on the ground.
It's a quiet week, but in fairness, we've had a good run, and March is looking good as well. So yeah, I'm not totally against a week off here and there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's been a good year so far, and I'm trying really hard to not get sucked into the negativity and not reply to every tweet Hearn sends out, and not go mad at whenever Bellew appears on Sky Sports News. So
exactly. We've all got Hey Bellew to look forward to, and the 12 kind of grueling rounds that's going to give us.
I still can't tell. Just to finish up, I still can't figure out if Bellew is just putting a face on, or if he's genuinely convinced himself he can win. I can't tell if it's a really good act or if he's completely delusional.
It's a good one. I think Bellew he's a guy, for all his his limitations, which he'll admit himself, he does have huge self-belief. He's taken the fight because it's the biggest fight for him. Obviously there's no doubt about that. I don't think he's going to go into that thinking that he can't win. Whether I don't think he can. But,
do you think it's a case of he'll get to the ring and then it will be because I can remember before the Brook Golovkin fight, I thought during the ring walks when Golovkin's music hit, I thought Brook looked terrified. Like he went white as a sheet, in my view. Obviously he fought very bravely, but I thought for about 30 seconds when the the white stripes kicked in, and then you saw the robe sort of coming down from the. I thought Brook looked really scared, and he sort of suddenly looked, oh God, what have I got myself into? And do you think it'll be the same with Bellew? Do you think suddenly he'll twig where he'll realise,
Yeah, I think maybe it's maybe it's the kind of curse of the O2 thing. We saw the same, obviously, Molina against Joshua. He looked absolutely petrified. When
he really did.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a point where his kind of self-confidence in that will carry him through. I think it's really going to hit when Hay first connects, and whether that's a jab. Hay says he can knock out Bellew with a jab. I wouldn't be surprised if he knocked him down. I think that's doable. I think it's really going to dawn on Bellew when he feels the right hand, and I think from there he's going to look for a way out.
Yeah, it could be a bit like the Adonis fight when I remember Bellew was very bullish at the weigh-in and all the rest of it, and then as soon as he got in the ring, you just saw he knew, fucking hell, I'm in trouble.
Right, but I think in the build-up he of course he thought he was going to win that fight, and
yeah, he was really confident, wasn't he? He was really up for it. Yeah,
and rightly so. Of course, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want him, I don't know, making up the numbers and just sort of showing up and not sort of. You don't want him defeated before he gets in the ring. But to be honest, being a bit negative, you just don't really want the fight to be happening at all in an ideal world. But we can't get.
I've just seen in the chat, actually, my mistake. Joshua Molina was MEN, not the O2. So I stand corrected.
Oh right, yeah. I was abroad for that fight. I didn't watch it live, but I can remember on the replay being very disappointed with Molina because he was saying all the right things in the build-up, and then he just looked like his
yeah, and
just terrified.
The point remains, of course, that he looked terrified when he took off his attire. Yeah.
And he suddenly realised what he got himself into. But anyway, Tom, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to do it again at some point. Probably have a break for the next couple of weeks, to be honest. Sorry, just say it one more. When's the date for your fight? So, is it March?
Yeah, sure. So it's Friday, April the 7th. And if you want to see a guy who's going to look terrified when he takes off his ring attire, that's going to be the night for you.
Speaking of not having any idea what he's getting himself into, I'm only joking, of course. The listeners are fully confident, and we'll see if we can put a bet on you that night as well.
Yeah, I'll be taking bets that night. Anyway. Thanks for having me, Sam. It's been
pleasure. We'll have to get you on again at some point, mate. Once we've got some more to discuss.
For sure.
But yeah, good luck with the training, and speak again soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.